Hello everyone, this is 4x4. Enjoy the show. A brand new SUV parked in a poor area of the city seemed like a tasty morsel for the experienced thief Ciro Bermudez. Having climbed into the driver's seat, the guy immediately pulled the radio out of the control panel, rummaged around in the glove compartment, tried on other people's aviators, and finally wet the passenger seats. The job was done and it was time to get going, but to Ciro's surprise, the doors were locked. Trying not to panic, the guy pulled the handles one by one, then tried to kick the windows out, but the glass wouldn't budge. In fear, Ciro began to pound on the windows with the first tool he came across. But it was just a waste of effort. Having given into hysteria, the thief began to click buttons, beat the steering wheel, and then disassembled the inner door trim to get to the lock. But he cut his hand badly. Not wanting to give up, Ciro went to extremes. He took a gun out of his backpack and fired at the windshield. Only after the bullet ricocheted and pierced his leg, and a woman passing by did not even hear his fuss and screams, Ciro finally realized. The car is armored, completely soundproofed, and the bulletproof windows are tightly tinted. He is trapped and no one will help him. Even the phone, his last hope, turned out to be discharged. So, suffering from severe pain, fear, and annoying cricket songs, Ciro spent the night in the car. The next morning did not promise anything good for the criminal. The Pepsi ran out and he had to lick the scant drops of condensation from the glass. One joy, you can listen to the radio and at least get a little distracted. But it was soon taken away by the owner of the torture chamber on wheels, obstetrician Enrique Ferrari. His call drove the thief crazy. Ciro started demanding water. He was hot, but the doctor simply told about himself, about how he had been robbed 28 times, and about how all the car systems were connected to his phone. The doors, wheels, and suspension were locked, so Ciro had better not move. The guy was furious, but Enrique, having disconnected, turned on the air conditioner at full power, and soon it became so cold in the cabin that Ciro was forced to unwrap the wound and put on a bloody t-shirt. After some time, the freezing torture stopped, and Enrique called again. This time, the owner promised to give Ciro water if he answered his question correctly. What would he do if he caught his son stealing? According to the doctor, Ciro answered incorrectly because he said that he would beat the thief. And instead of water, Enrique told a story about how during the robbery, the criminals held a gun to the head of his 5-year-old grandson for 3 hours. But Ciro started screaming and threatening to kill again, and as soon as he asked for water, the doctor silently hung up. Later, a policeman became interested in the armored car, and Ciro started screaming at the top of his lungs. However, no one heard him. The policeman simply wrote out a fine and drove away. And soon it started pouring, a real mockery of a man suffering from thirst. During another call, Enrique, in exchange for personal data, pointed out to Ciro the presence of water in the windshield wiper hose, and the guy hurried to drink the nasty-tasting water. The next night was spent talking to the cricket, watching people, and thinking about the uselessness of surveillance cameras. And the next morning, Ciro developed a fever, and Dr. Enrique kindly provided him with his consultation. The wound had festered and most likely the guy was shivering, so it would not be superfluous to turn on the interior heating. Ciro was literally languishing from the heat, and his tormentor mocked him, telling long and monotonous stories from his life. Enrique also dedicated the guy to his personal misfortune, a widower doctor with the last stage of cancer, to whom the doctors gave a term of less than a year. After some time, in the glove compartment of the car, hungry Ciro found an old instruction. Crying from self-pity, the guy swallows a hard piece of paper and washes it down with his own urine. Among the things in the backpack, he finds a children's magazine with dinosaur stickers and, out of boredom, sticks them all over the interior. During the day, a thief tried to break into the car from the outside, and Ciro hoped that he would succeed. But soon he witnessed how the locals took justice into their own hands. The police officers who arrived barely managed to rescue the guy from the crowd. At night, in despair, the exhausted Ciro almost ate his new friend, the cricket. This time, he told the insect that he was a third-generation thief, and what a poor country he lived in, where laws were written by the rich for the rich. Several days had passed since his imprisonment. The criminal, suffering from hunger and thirst, begged Enrique to let him go home. But instead of answering, the doctor began to read the morning newspaper to the prisoner. He was in a good mood, so the guy could look under the brake pedal and find a chocolate bar there. Meanwhile, time dragged on painfully slowly for Ciro. During all the days of his imprisonment, he managed to gain knowledge about some of the residents of the neighborhood, simply by observing them. Although the situation seemed hopeless, the guy did not give up trying to escape and even made a small hole in the door. However, no one heard his cries for help. Suddenly, Enrique calls him and says that he has information about Irina and Lionel. Ciro gets worked up and starts threatening, but the doctor calms him down and says that he just talked to his family. He introduced himself as a lottery player and gave them $150,000 in cash, which Ciro allegedly won. By giving them the money, Enrique hopes that the young and beautiful woman Irina will be able to start life anew, without Ciro. According to the doctor, the guy does not deserve his family. Enrique checked his biography and found out that Ciro killed 3 people during several of his robberies. In tears, the guy says that he has already served time for the mistakes he made. What else does this psycho want from him? But in response, he heard only one phrase: "Nothing, you are doomed." Having calmed down, Ciro inserts the battery, which has been recharged by the sun, into his phone and manages to leave a short message to his wife about how he screwed up. At night, the guy releases a cricket through a hole in the door, and later aimlessly presses the ignition button. At some point, the car starts, and Ciro, having regained his spirit, backs up. Through the broken glass, he finally gets out onto the street. Having hobbled along the night street, the guy goes into a diner and greedily pounces on burgers and water. The guard asks him to pay, but Ciro kills him in cold blood. It was a dream. However, the nightmare pushed Ciro to end his suffering and shoot himself. A second before, Dr. Enrique calls, and the guy asks him to show him his son. Having received a refusal, Ciro shoots himself, but the cartridge jammed, which plunged the guy into complete despair. Suddenly, Enrique himself appears in front of the car. The car's interior smelled sickening, so its owner had to spray the aerosol in front of himself. The doctor clicked the shutter on the gun and put it in front of him, after which he handed the thief a joint. However, he did not share the peanuts, and instead squeezed the pus out of Ciro's leg, who was writhing in pain. Enrique was suddenly distracted by work, and while he was talking, Ciro shot at him and tried to run away. Once on the street, the guy shot in the air to attract people's attention, but Enrique, slightly wounded, caught up with him and dragged him back to the car. Soon, the small street was filled with onlookers, media, and police. Enrique held the criminal hostage, declaring that he was the victim because Ciro was trying to rob him. Enrique took justice into his own hands and called on people to vote: kill the criminal or hand him over to the police, who would release him the next day. The crowd's opinions were divided. After several hours of persuasion, the police sent a retired negotiator who tried to convince Enrique to let the guy go. But he quickly realized that the obstetrician had nothing to lose, and he had already managed to win the public's sympathy. Then the negotiator asked Enrique to think about his daughter, who would live her whole life with the fact that her dad was a murderer. The crowd pressed harder and harder and demanded that the criminal be killed, but Enrique gave in and let the sufferer Ciro go. The policeman asked the doctor to lower his weapon, but instead, Enrique climbed into his car and 20 seconds later shot into a full tank of gas. The witnesses to this explosion were shocked. No one expected such a tragic outcome. Well, Ciro was soon released. And here you will find even more stories. Subscribe because it's interesting with us. See you soon, everyone.